Hey guys, so today's talk is about crafting a winning VC pitch. And so the plan is to spend 20 minutes just talking about how to craft a winning VC pitch, and then answer any questions you guys have at the end. If you want to ask questions kind of as I'm going, that's fine. Keep it as informal as possible. So just so I know, how many people have actually raised money before or are in the process of raising money now? Cool. Oh wow, there's a lot of people. Has anyone actually ever worked with a VC before, had a VC on their board, or successfully raised money from VC? Okay, so 2. So what maybe some lessons that you learned pitching VCs?
Well, I think I come from a different perspective because I was a lawyer for VCs before I founded a startup.
Yeah.
So my perspective might be slightly different.
Yeah.
But I think the most important thing about a VC is that they're still a person, and you have to really make sure that you talk to them like they're a person.
Yep.
And they're a parent, or there are a lot of things that might appeal to what you're doing. And if you're not pitching VCs that have interests that are similar to what you're trying to pitch, you're wasting your time.
Yep.
And the most important thing is that if they say, well, that's a great idea, come back to us when you've done X, Y, Z, that means they're not interested. So
Yeah. You're too early, right?
yeah, you're too early, or
Yeah.
come back to us whenever. That means they're not interested. That's a nice way of saying, don't come back.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. And what was your experience with that? Have you raised money before from VCs or?
Not VC.
Okay. Okay. Let's jump into it then. So just a little bit of background on kind of me and why I'm here. So I'm a VC at Comcast Ventures. So look at specifically the retail commerce ecosystems, but in terms of Comcast Ventures, we look at sort of the full technology spectrum, consumer, digital media, ad tech, enterprise SaaS, health tech, the whole gamut. And so I see about 20 to 30 pitches a week in my capacity there. So very quickly as a VC, you start to see certain patterns and things that people do right and things that people perhaps could improve on. And so hopefully I can share some of that with you guys today. Before becoming a VC, I was actually a founder of a VC-backed company called Fashion State. And we raised multiple rounds of both venture capital as well as angel money. And so I've definitely been on your side of the table and can definitely empathize with what you guys are going through for the ones that are pitching. Linked to number 2, I've also been turned down by many VCs, right? And so I think sort of no matter how well your company's going, how well or how badly your company's going, part of the process is just being okay with being turned down and taking that feedback and incorporating that into your pitch for the next round of VCs. 4th is I love early stage startups, and the 5th is I've never actually been to Queens before, so this is kind of cool. So the first thing I want to do is talk a little bit about the basics of a pitch, right? What makes a really good pitch? What is the pitch comprised of? And specifically, how much time should you spend on each component of your pitch, right? We'll then go into sort of what makes a good pitch great, and just sort of some lessons that I've learned along the way, and then we'll do some Q&A. So just this slide was just my attempt at just very concisely summarizing what a good pitch has in it, right? So there are 2 relevant kind of questions that you need to answer here, which is what does the VC want to hear about, right? So what are the topics or the parts of my business that I need to highlight to the VC? The second is how much time should I spend in my 10 to 15 minute pitch on each of those topics? And I think the first kind of mistake that I see entrepreneurs now being on the other side of the table make is they don't really understand that they treat sort of all the parts of the pitch with equal weighting, right? And I think especially at the early stage, where a lot of you guys are, that's actually not the way that VCs weight the investment, right? And so just diving into this, I've tried to sort of split out what's the relative importance that I place and that VCs I know place on the different components of the pitch, right? So the first critical component is obviously you guys. In an early stage company, you're typically pre-revenue, pre-user base even. You might just be a PowerPoint, you might just be pitching off a PowerPoint deck and not even have a demo, right? And so the real critical factor, the first thing that I look for is, how great is this person that's pitching me, right? And I think, a lot of you, at least in the last BigBuild, had a lot of emphasis on sort of, I worked at Google in the past or I worked here, and there was a lot of talk about sort of the experience that you guys had. But kind of the way I assess you as a VC is a lot broader than just where you've worked in the past, right? So it's things like passion, right? How passionate are you about the product or the company that you're building, right? How much vision do you have? Can you see, 3 or 4 years ahead in your market and really anticipate some of the trends that are gonna come up and affect, you and your company? Are you a leader, right? A big part of building a company is being able to recruit an executive team and a junior team that can help support, what you're building. And so there's a lot of things that go under sort of you that are beyond just where you've worked in the past. And so kind of to your point about VCs are people, they're going to assess you as people holistically as opposed to just sort of your narrow set of past experiences in a work setting. So that to me is about a third of the whole investment decision is how impressive is this entrepreneur? Can they hire a great team? Do they have the vision to take this business to become a really, really big business? The second component, which is probably the next roughly third of the investment decision, is around what is the market dynamic here, right? And so to me, the market dynamic has two components. The first is market size, growth, the structure of the market, how fragmented is it, how concentrated is it, and then the second piece of the market dynamic is the competitive dynamic, right? So how many competitors are in this market? Why are you going to win? How are they positioning themselves versus you, et cetera, et cetera. And, put together with kind of the team, which is you and your co-founder and the 1 or 2 other people that you've hired potentially, that's over half of it's kind of almost 2/3 of the whole investment decision. Is this a great team? Are they in a great market? The third really, really important thing is product, right? And I think if you nail sort of the team aspect, the market dynamics, and the product, you're pretty much 80% of the way there. So on product, and this really depends on what you're building, but what's really, really important here is, does this team have a product sensibility? How sharp is the product that they're showing me? Is there magic around what they're showing me, right? And I encourage you guys as much as you can to, especially when you're talking about product, is to show and not describe. So the best demo, the best product descriptions are demos. And so going into the pitch, being ready to demo the product and just showing what you've built rather than describing it is infinitely more powerful than a description. So really the pitch, at least at this early stage, and it differs for later stages, is all about you, the market, and your product. And again, if you just focus in on those 3 things, that's pretty much our investment criteria right there. Now, there are 2 other pieces that I think people spend way, way too much time on, at this stage. So one is business model. Like, how are we gonna make money, right? I think it really helps if you've thought about it and potentially you have some ideas around how to monetize. But at the end of the day, I think most VCs will agree that if you're building something that a lot of people use and a lot of people love and a lot of people engage with, the monetization part of the equation will be easier to solve down the road. right? And so I hear a lot of pitches, even I'm thinking of a few companies that pitched sort of yesterday, where they spent almost half the time on, here's potentially what we could do around business model. We could do advertising, we could sell product, we could do X, Y, Z. And a lot of those decisions I think are made prematurely, and I think way too much time in the beginning is spent talking about the business model. So I think throw up a few ideas if you have them, but don't spend too much time in the pitch discussing them. And then the last piece, which sort of I put as all other, which is things like your financial projections. Some people talk about exit strategy, which I don't necessarily believe in, but fine if you want to talk about it. Various other aspects of your team, etc. They're just not that important to the investment decision. Now, you might be thinking of them every day because you're the CEO or you're the founder and you're running the business, and you should be thinking about those things. But from a winning an investment point of view, they're just not important at this stage. And so again, just recapping that three things matter. Three things get you 80% of the way there, which is selling yourself, selling your product, and making sure you're in a market that has a positive dynamic. Yeah.
For the first item, right, you said about you.
Yeah.
From your experience, is it better if you have one leader in the startup, or is it two? I get that for most people, I think two is a good number to have, but from your personal experience, what's your opinion?
Yeah, I think a lot of VCs have trouble funding sole founders, and that's because, and even being an entrepreneur, just knowing how important my co-founder was, just for emotional support, the startups are really hard, right? And it's sort of inevitable, no matter how good you're going at the moment, no matter how much traction you have, that you're going to hit various bumps sort of along the way. And so if for no other reason that you have someone next to you that understands what you're going through, that can hear you bitch about all the things that went wrong today, that when the sky's falling down, just someone is there, just sort of as a peer to you. I think for that reason alone, a co-founder is really, really important. And the thing is, if you've never done a company, especially a venture-backed company before, you sort of scoff at it a little bit and say, I could do this myself, and this person doesn't really add anything to the team, but I found that that's just not true. I think there are obviously other reasons around, like, let's say you're a business person, you want a tech co-founder, there are obviously kind of skill, complementary skill type arguments. But even if they don't exist, just having someone there for emotional support is huge. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Cool. So, talked a little bit about what makes a pitch work, right? I want to talk a little bit about sort of the winning pitches. And, the pitches that we've funded, since I've been at Comcast Ventures, what are the 5 things that really strike out as being common amongst all of them, right? And you've got to remember that VCs probably fund less than 1% of the companies they see. And so I just did these 5 points by looking through all my notes from all the pitches that I've sat in, and they pretty much existed in every single winning pitch. So the first is really about founder market fit. So a lot of people talk about founder product fit. Market fit in terms of the product that you're building, product market fit. I think what's more important at the seed stage, where you guys are at, is founder market fit. Right, so how am I uniquely, as a founder, positioned to solve the problem that I'm proposing that I will solve? Right, so it's great that you worked at Google on the search team, but you really need to draw the line very clearly around how that experience is going to help you sell beauty subscription boxes, right? Similarly, if you've worked at Google Maps before and you're building the next mobile geo-mapping service, that's a fantastic founder. I get it, right? That's a great founder market fit. So the tip there is sort of if what you're doing or your experiences in the past are not directly correlating to the company that you're building today, you really need to search for highlighting and linking kind of your past to what you're building today. And somehow establishing that, hey, me as a founder, I've actually got an unfair advantage, or I'm somehow uniquely positioned to solve the problem that I'm solving today. The second one is founder visionaryism, right? Which is being able to understand how your company is going to navigate the twists and turns of startup life, right? So going into an investment, we're looking at 5 to 7 year exit horizons, right? This is not a 1 year or 2 year decision that we're making. So the best founders come in and make it very clear that A, they understand where the market has come, right, for the particular space they're in. So using geomapping as an example, really understanding sort of the history of Google Maps, why Google Maps won over competing services, what they're doing right, what they're doing wrong. And then going forward, how will the market evolve, and tell a story around how you guys, your company will position yourself kind of at the forefront of that evolution. So there needs to be a little bit of sort of peering around the corner on this. The third piece, which is linked to the second, is defensibility. And I think this is becoming more and more important as the cost of starting a company is kind of in secular decline, right? So you no longer have to buy your own servers, you no longer have to necessarily hire developers to get a company off the ground. I mean, you guys are right now probably starting companies on less than 5 or 10 grand of your own money, maybe significantly less than that, right? So in a world where the supply of startups is going up, how will you build a company that is defensible in the long term, and how will you build the moat around your business that really makes it impermeable to competition, or at least for a period of time makes it impermeable to competition? And the answer might be, in terms of defensibility, obviously for a marketplace business, you can talk a lot about network effect, right? For a commerce business, the answer might just be, we're going to raise a lot of money and build scale on the unit economics of the business. So I think the source of defensibility depends on what business you're building, but I think it really is important to articulate how you are going to defend your position in the market. The fourth really important thing for me is traction. So what traction have you got so far, right? And I think founders tend to be maybe a little bit embarrassed, or maybe don't have as good a handle on the data as they otherwise should have. But the best thing there is kind of top level revenue, number of users, growth in user base, and engagement of those users, right? And so just giving the VC a very clear understanding of here's where the business is at is super useful. And funnily enough, like a lot of people don't do that. Which means that I have to go back and chase them up and ask them for their data, etc., and it's just not as cool. And then the last piece is nail the unit economics, which is related to traction. So the way that you look at traction, or the way that I look at traction at the early stage, is I split it out into two parts, right? I look at it first at a unit perspective, right, which is per customer or per user. What is the engagement? What is the engagement, right? If it's a commerce business, what's the lifetime value of this customer versus the cost of acquiring this customer? And if it's a social media business, an app business, a user-based business, I look at how engaged are these users, right? To what extent are they coming back to the app or the platform and using it, right? And I separate that from the conversation of how many users or how many dollars in revenue do you have, right? Because in the early stage, to be honest, no matter what number you sort of come out with, it's just not, the VC is going to be thinking we want to multiply that by 10, 100, 1,000, whatever the number is. If you can tell a great story around the unit economics, the first piece of that, which is, hey, only 1,000 people are using my app, but 75% of them come every day to use it. That's a much more compelling story than 10,000 people are using my app and 10% of people come every day. So just understand, that's a really crucial distinction there that not many people really get, but you're much better nailing the unit economics than nailing the aggregate economics. And if you can understand that and you can iterate your product around getting that engagement up or getting the lifetime value of the customer up, you can then tell the story of, hey, we've got 1,000 really engaged users or 1,000 really important customers, profitable customers. We're raising 500 grand or $1 million to get us to 10,000 of these customers. That's a really powerful story, regardless of how many customers you actually have. So just the last slide here, because I know we're sort of running out of time, so this is just sort of general, so talked a little bit about pitches and the actual pitch and what makes a great pitch. This is just a general slide on just things that I've learned, being around VCs and pitching VCs, and hopefully some of this, you can use. So the first is how you're actually introduced to the VC or come into the VC actually really matters a lot. So I'm working on an investment now where we were introduced to this entrepreneur from an existing portfolio company CEO, and that introduction carries a lot of weight. And maybe it even means that from a diligence perspective, we can sort of trust certain things that we would need to dig into had this person just come in off the street, right? Similarly, when we're in a partnership meeting or an investment committee meeting, trying to decide which companies we want to invest in, almost the most powerful, thing that anyone can say is, yes, I really love this entrepreneur. I actually went out and sought them. The second most powerful way to get introduced is, from another entrepreneur or investor that I trust, right? And so the probability of you getting funded, irrespective of how well your company's going, dramatically increases if you're introduced through a trusted source. So it's not something that I necessarily knew, like starting my first company, but it's just something to keep in mind as you guys sort of reach out and pitch. The second thing is, at the early stage when you're raising your first round of money, it's less about, I think, optimizing your valuation and your term sheet terms, as it is making sure you have the right investor group and right people around the table, right? So the things that your investors are going to do, and certainly my investors when I raised my first 600K in outside money, the things that they are going to do for you are going to outweigh any sort of valuation or term that you can negotiate on the margin. So if I think of our investors, they gave us they referred me our first 3 hires, right? They introduced me to investors that we would later close with in our later rounds of financing. They gave us credibility. So the amount of value that they're going to give you sort of far outweighs the 5 percentage points you're arguing about on the valuation front. And so I would say to you guys is, if you're lucky enough to have multiple term sheets and choices around who to raise money from, choose the smart money on slightly weaker terms than the dumb money on the best valuation every time. Now that's different for later stage startups, but you guys don't need to worry about that. The third thing is integrity really matters, and you hear a lot about the tech scene is really it's a really close community and it's a really tight community, and I certainly knew that as an entrepreneur, but just being on the other side and seeing the companies that we talk about, the entrepreneurs that are sort of blacklisted because they haven't acted with integrity, it can really kill your tech career, right? So things like saying you have term sheets when you don't, things like saying that investor X is interested when they're not, just know that stuff is going to come back. And so it's always just, honesty is the best policy, I think, always, but certainly in such a closed community, not being honest can have really bad repercussions for you. The last two here are, so the fourth one is, there's all this advice out there around how to sort of get the best deal from VCs or investors. And there's only really one way, which is have multiple options, right? Create a bidding dynamic. And so to the extent that you have multiple term sheets, you have choices and you can play investors off each other in a bidding type situation. And you'll probably get better terms and a better valuation than if you only had one term sheet. And so there's really only one way to optimize the outcome for you as the entrepreneur, which is have multiple investors wanting to invest, in your round. The last piece, which I put a stop in pitching and getting back to building, I think is probably the most important, which is, your guys' job and what you're good at and what you're going to do for the next 5 years is, that much about building a great company and this much about fundraising, hopefully, right? So I see so many entrepreneurs that sort of get a term sheet and hold back maybe because the valuation is a 3 million pre-money instead of a 3.5 million pre-money, or because the liquidation preference isn't what they would otherwise want it to be, or perhaps they want this VC and they haven't made up their mind yet. And the advice that I would give is it's hard to raise money, despite everything you read about. It's hard to raise money, right? And it's hard to find an investor that you actually genuinely get along with and sort of believe in and that believes in you. And so if you're sort of 80% of the way there on those things, just take the money and go back to building the company. And don't worry about optimizing terms. Don't worry about optimizing every single slice of the term sheet. Do what you do best, which is company building. Take the money and then move forward. So yeah, that's all I had in terms of the formal part of it. But happy to answer any questions if there are. Yep.
I was going to say, you might also want to stop pitching and get back to building if you've done a few pitches and you're not getting a lot of traction.
Yeah.
Maybe you need to go back and just build a little bit more before you spend too much time pitching.
Absolutely.
But I've had a lot of people give us that advice along the way. It's like, why are you going to VC money when you could just raise a little bit of angel money and then come back with some more traction? And not just to get a better term sheet, but to come in, to spend more time on a product instead of just not trying to find money.
Absolutely. And to just piggyback on that, there are a lot of companies that come in that are just, we joked about being too early, but that actually are too early, right? And just the cost of getting traction, experimenting and trying new things has just gone down to a point where it's sort of borderline wasting everyone's time if you're coming in with just a PowerPoint deck, right? And so to your point, I think if you are getting multiple no's, that's definitely a part of the feedback. What I'd say to that though, also just to make it doubly complex, is we probably got 9 or 10 no's before we got our first yes, right? In the first round of money that I raised. And so there's always this game that you play with yourself around like, is this really no because my company's not at the level I want it to be at? Or is it no because I haven't met the right business partner, the right investor? And it's a judgment call, right? But definitely your point around a lot of companies coming in too early, I see that all the time, so.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. The thing is you're only 1 or 2 or 3 people.
Yeah.
You can only spend so much time on each thing. And every minute you spend pitching is a minute you don't spend building or marketing. And so you have to be doing all 3 all the time. And meeting with VCs is also marketing in some ways, depending on who you're running into there.
Absolutely.
But you want to make smart ideas. You don't want to just spend all your time trying to find money.
Absolutely. And I think the other piece which isn't on here is once you are pitching, sort of pitch hard and close your funding round and go back. Like make sure that the window that you're out there on the market raising money is a very well defined and hopefully short window, right? Because the kind of dirty secret of VC, I guess, is if you've been on the block for 3 months and you haven't been able to raise money, from anyone, that's a really strong negative signal. Now, we can argue about whether that should be a strong negative signal, but the fact of the matter is it is. And so, I think being very tight around, we want to close the round in 8 weeks or whatever the time frame is going to help you. So, yep.
So can you elaborate a little more? Like, it's not about terms, it's about people. Like, isn't it most of the time people will look at your product first?
Yeah.
Or are they going to look at your team first?
Yeah. So that point is about if you have, as the entrepreneur, multiple investors wanting to invest in your round, and you have a choice to pick term sheet A, which gives you a $10 million valuation, versus term sheet B, which gives you an $8 million valuation. A lot of the times I see entrepreneurs picking term sheet A without regard to who offered that term sheet to you, right? And so the point of that is, you might be much better off taking term sheet B with a 20% lower valuation if that person, that VC, that investor is going to be strategic from a value add perspective to your company. If that makes sense. So if I'm running a pet food subscription business and I'm getting $10 million from random VC versus an $8 million valuation from someone that started a pet food company before and knows all about the market and can get me my first 5 hires, etc. The point of that is to say you should probably take that term sheet instead. If that makes sense. Does that make sense? And then I think then I think as you progress as a company and are raising big licks of capital, I think then it becomes much more about valuation because you're trying to do things like optimize for dilution and your company has already proved itself and maybe you're thinking about an exit. And so I think that's a different discussion, but definitely in the early stage, it's all about the people around the table. So.
You mentioned that where you get referred from matters a lot. So how do you start if you're just going to call someone to a certain entry point?
Yeah. So definitely, I wouldn't sort of get a lot of like LinkedIn pings and things like that. I wouldn't waste your time there because I don't think anyone really responds well to that. I think the easiest hack, to be honest, is events. So I'm not really personally an events person, but I think going to where the investors are, right? So a lot of them will tweet, hey, I'm speaking at this event, or I'm running this event, and so just going there and meeting them face to face is probably the first hack. The second hack is getting referrals from your entrepreneur friends. And you'll be surprised, even just if we even polled the group here, you probably know like many of the VCs in New York just in this group, right? And so being really smart about just organizing 20 minutes with your entrepreneur friend and figuring out who they know and who they can refer you to matters a lot. There's a related piece to your question, which is once you've pitched an investor that has passed on your company, that has declined to invest in your company, is that person a good source of introductions to other investors? And I think generally the answer to that question is no, right? So I think one of the things that I get from entrepreneurs a lot is, hey, you passed on this investment, but can you introduce me to so-and-so from this VC or so-and-so from this angel investor? And of course, the first thing they're going to ask me is, why did you pass, right? And so I think it creates a really tough dynamic when the entrepreneur sort of asks for an intro post being declined. So I don't think that's a really good source for the entrepreneur.
Yeah, I just want to support what you said about how you go out there and meet people, because especially now in New York, it started from zero. So I've been sent to startup weekend competitions. Yeah. And the second I was in, I knew how the judges was. Yeah. And that person I've seen numerous times after presented my idea, because you would know what I told you. Yeah. But the point is, when you know what your objective is, and you're just trying to move an inch at a time, you can just keep doing it for not very much money.
Yeah, and even to to your point, like even when I was just starting out as an entrepreneur, I think people's networks sort of follow like a power curve, power law dynamic, which is, the top 10 people you know are going to be your warmest, are going to give you 80% of the referrals that you'll sort of ever get, right? And so especially in the beginning, you only need to know sort of 1 to 2 really well-connected people, and that's all you really need to get going. You don't need to know 10 or 20, right? You need to know 1 or 2 because they're the ones that are going to be your kind of Sherpas that can sort of connect you to everyone that matters. Certainly that was my experience from my very first angel investors. So, cool. Did anyone have any other questions? Cool. Thanks, guys.